24 red-blooded U.S. military personnel were injured in a series of drone attacks at American bases in Iraq and Syria. President Joe Biden had to stop his speech suddenly due to an issue that required him to go into the Situation Room. What is happening? Check this out.
I apologize. I have to go to the Situation Room with another issue that I have to deal with. But thank you. I apologize. I have to go to the Situation Room with another issue that I have to deal with. But thank you.
Not gonna lie, when he said that he had to get to the Situation Room, my first thought was that the Situation Room was like a euphemism for the bathroom. But seriously guys, the urgent issue happened as Biden was addressing the nation regarding Hamas and the hostages that were taken captive in Israel. His speech came just moments after the reports were released that Hamas had released 2 hostages held inside of Gaza after the October 7th terror attack, which brought the total of hostages released to 4. He told Hamas that when the rest of those hostages are released, then we'll talk. Last week, Hamas released 2 American hostages as the Biden administration negotiated to help secure the first convoy of humanitarian aid to Gaza. And now, just a couple of days ago, Biden was addressing the estimated 200 hostages in Israel when he suddenly had to stop his speech due to an issue that arose. Biden's words? I apologize, but I have to go to the Situation Room. There's an issue I need to deal with. Now, according to some reports, the White House said Iran was in some cases actively facilitating rocket and drone attacks by Iranian-backed proxy groups in U.S. military bases in Iraq and Syria. Reports also state that President Joe Biden has directed the Department of Defense to brace for more and respond appropriately. According to the intel from the White House, Iran is closely monitoring these events and in some cases actively facilitating these attacks and spurring on others who may want to exploit the conflict for their own good or for that of Iran. So the threat is real and our own military could very well be dragged into war. Just recently, 24 American military personnel were wounded last week in a series of drone attacks at American air bases in Iraq and Syria. The Pentagon confirmed the attacks last week, but the number of U.S. casualties has not been previously disclosed. Amazing how this is being ignored in the mainstream media. You know, my heart aches for the parents of the service members. Am I right, guys? I'm just worried that our country will abandon our people and leave weapons again for the enemy to kill us. Now, really, guys, now is the time to subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss out on these very serious, very urgent updates. Go ahead and tap that notification bell too while you're at it. You never know when they may take down my videos and maybe even our channel. We got to stay updated, guys. One financial freedom fam throughout all of this. And hey, if you really want to support the channel and the work we do, go ahead and light up the like button for the video so that you can help more people to find our videos. It's totally free and it really helps out the channel a lot. Appreciate you guys. So here we go, guys. 20 American personnel sustained minor injuries a few weeks ago when at least 2 one-way attack drones targeted Al Tanf military base in southern Syria. One of the drones was shot. And thank goodness all of the wounded personnel were returned to duty and there was no damage to any military installations. On the same day, another 4 American personnel suffered minor injuries during 2 separate drone attacks against U.S. and coalition forces stationed at Al-Assad base in western Iraq. The U.S. shot down the one-way attack drone, but the debris from one destroyed a hangar that contained small aircraft. All of the injured personnel returned to duty. But unfortunately, an American civilian contractor died due to a cardiac incident during the shelter-in-place order. Now, as you can imagine, the attacks came while there were rising tensions in the region over the conflict in Israel. According to the Pentagon press secretary, over the past weeks, U.S. and coalition forces were attacked at least 10 separate times in Iraq and 3 separate times in Syria via a mix of one-way attack drones and rockets. Apparently, the groups conducting the attacks were supported by Iran and its Islamic Revolutionary Guard base. The Pentagon also mentioned the prospect for more significant escalation against U.S. forces and personnel across the region in very near term, coming from Iranian proxy forces and ultimately from Iran. Now, with that said, the military is very clear in that they always reserve the right to defend themselves and they will never hesitate to take action when needed to protect our forces and our interests overseas. But some of my friends have been asking, why does the US military have any bases in Syria? What would the US do to a Syrian military base if they built one on US soil? Some critics, they say it may be time that we accept that we're not the global police and come home and start fixing the problems here at home on our home turf instead of building and maintaining military bases on the other side of the world in countries that despise us. What do you guys think? Does it make sense? Anyway, what we're really watching out for here is the threat of wider war in the Middle East. I mean, let's not forget, historians are still fascinated by the outbreak of the First World War. How could the assassination of an Austrian archduke in Sarajevo in June 1914 have led, just a few weeks later, to a conflict that dragged every major power in Europe and eventually the US? The question is particularly troubling because many of the leaders involved tried hard to avoid a general European war. The German and Russian empires exchanged messages after messages trying to defuse the month-long crisis that led to the conflict, but they failed. Now, we're seeing this kind of unintended escalation happening in the Middle East. I mean, what's happening in Gaza is bad enough, but more and more leaders are worried about the wider region, the danger of a general war in the Middle East that could pull in Iran, the US, and even Saudi Arabia. For the Biden administration, that threat of a wider war is now regarded as the central challenge in the entire crisis. As one Washington insider put it, all the countries involved have thresholds that, if crossed, will make them believe that they have to act. But nobody really knows what the other side's threshold is. Just recently, Iran issued a clear threat that its own threshold is getting closer. Ibram Breezy went on X Twitter to state that Israel's action in Gaza have crossed the red lines, and this may force everyone to take action. He also said Washington asked them not to do anything, but they keep giving widespread support to Israel. So how could escalation play out? Well, just last week, the US bombed some groups in Syria that are backed by Iran. The US did this because they were responding to attacks on US forces in Iraq and Syria carried out by Iranian proxies. If these attacks continue and American soldiers are actually killed, the US might respond even more forcefully. Plus, there's a key player in all of this: Hezbollah. They're an Iranian-backed militant group based in Lebanon. If they ramp up their attacks on Israel, they have enough accurate missiles to basically force most of Israel's population into bomb shelters. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was warned that Lebanon could face devastation if Israel is attacked from its territory. But if Hezbollah is at risk, Iran might send troops from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps to fight alongside them. At that point, Israel could decide to strike not only in Lebanon, but also in Iran. Now, if a war involving Hezbollah breaks out, other groups supported by Iran in the region may also increase their attacks on Israeli and American targets. Iran might even follow up on its occasional threats to close the Strait of Hormuz, which supports about 1/5 of global oil shipments. This would seriously shake up the world economy and directly threaten Saudi Arabia, even the US. The US Navy would likely try to reopen the strait, but that might lead to further retaliation from Iran and its allies. The US has troops and bases all over the region that could become targets, including in Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Syria, and Iraq. The Americans are particularly concerned about the Houthis in Yemen, who have been involved in a brutal conflict with Saudi Arabia. They fired rockets toward Israel recently and have previously targeted Saudi oil facilities. A few precise missiles could damage the desalination plants that supply water to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia's capital. Now, if things play out this way, it could be a disaster for everyone involved, and they all realize it. But they also feel that they can't afford not to respond to certain events. Israel has invaded Gaza without a credible exit plan because it feels like it must restore deterrence. Iran believes that it has to show that its axis of resistance is supporting the Palestinians. America believes that it must respond forcefully to any attacks on its troops. The crisis has made Saudi Arabian Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman quite concerned about the risk of a regional war. His strategy is to press the Americans to influence the Israelis. The Americans are hoping that key players like MBS, Qatar, and even China can persuade Iran to avoid further escalation and show restraint. The conflict between Palestinians and Israel has already taken a pretty significant toll, with thousands of casualties since Hamas's deadly attack and hostage-taking. So there are definitely valid concerns about the potential for a larger conflict that could claim even more lives. A more intense escalation could have far-reaching consequences, especially when combined with the global challenges of the war in Ukraine and the ongoing ongoing pandemic recovery. The Middle East, where the conflict is taking place, could be particularly affected by higher oil prices, accelerating inflation, and slowing economic growth. But these impacts could all spill over to the rest of the world. If the situation gets worse, there's the potential of a global recession, which would definitely impact working class Americans. Plus, there's a looming risk of direct conflict between Israel and Iran. This scale of conflict would have significant implications for the region, meaning high human costs and substantial consequences for the global economy. Iran is believed to provide support to Hamas, a group designated as terrorist organization by the EU and the US, although Iran has denied any direct involvement. If concrete evidence links Iran to the recent attack, it could escalate the situation and lead to the possibility of a direct Israel-Iran war. The Middle East is a critical source of global oil supply, with a fifth of it coming from this region. In the event of a direct war between Iran and Israel, the excess oil production capacity that Saudi Arabia and the UAE typically have might not be available to leave the region, as it has to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, which Iran could easily close off. This could lead to a huge increase in oil prices, potentially reaching $150 per barrel or more. You guys remember gas prices in 2022, right? Yeah. That bad, maybe even worse. As a result, global inflation could rise to about 6.7% next year, significantly impacting global economic growth, potentially slowing it down by 1 percentage point to 1.7%, the slowest rate in nearly 4 decades. This could lead to a reduction of approximately $1 trillion in global output next year, potentially pushing the global economy into recession. In a situation like this, it would really hit home for Americans. I mean, it could seriously mess with people's buying power and even lead to job cuts. That, in turn, could set off a major economic crisis, causing all sorts of problems that ripple out into the world economy. Definitely something to watch out for in our next update.